Yes, continued the emperor. I hesitated long. I weighed every argument on both sides, and I at length concluded that I could not make head against the coalition without, and the royalists within, and I should be unable to oppose the numerous sects which would have been created by the violence committed on the legislative body to control that portion of the multitude which must be driven by force, or to resist that moral condemnation which imputes to him who is unfortunate every evil that ensues. Abdication was therefore absolutely the only step I could adopt. All was lost in spite of me. I foresaw and foretold this, but still, I had no other alternative. The Allies always pursued the same system against me. They began it at Prague, continued it at Frankfurt, at Châtillon, at Paris, and at Fontainebleau. Their conduct displayed considerable judgment. The French might have been duped in 1814, but it is difficult to conceive how they could have been deceived in 1815. However, history will forever tarnish the memory of those who suffered themselves to be misled. I foretold their fate when I was departing to join the army. Do not resemble, I said, the Greeks of the Lower Empire who amused themselves in debating while the battering ram was leveling the walls of their city. And when forced to abdicate, I said, our enemies wish to separate me from the army. When they shall have succeeded, they will separate the army from you. You will then be merely a wretched flock, the prey of wild beasts. We asked the emperor whether, with the concurrence of the legislative body, he thought he could have saved France. He replied without hesitation that he would confidently have undertaken to do so, and that he would have answered for his success in less than a fortnight, continued he. That is to say, before any considerable mass of Allied force could have assembled before Paris, I should have completed my fortifications and have collected before the walls of the city, and out of the wrecks of the army, upwards of 80,000 good troops and 300 pieces of horsed artillery. After a few days of firing, the National Guard, the federal troops, and the inhabitants of Paris would have sufficed to defend the entrenchments. I should have had 80,000 disposable troops at my command. It is well known how advantageously I was capable of employing this force. The achievements of 1814 were still fresh in remembrance. Chambopere, Montmirail, Caron, Montereau were still present in the imagination of our enemies. The same scenes would have revived the recollection of the prodigies of the preceding year. I was then surnamed the 100,000 men. The rapidity and decision of our successes gave rise to this name. The conduct of the French troops was most admirable. Never did a handful of brave men accomplish so many miracles. If their high achievements have never been publicly known owing to the circumstances which attended our disasters, they have at least been duly appreciated by our enemies, who counted the number of our attacks by our victories. We were truly the heroes of fable. Paris said he would in a few days have become impregnable. He appealed to the nation, the magnitude of the danger, the excitation of the public mind, the grandeur of the spectacle would have drawn multitudes to the capital. I could undoubtedly have assembled upwards of 400,000 men, and I imagine the Allied force did not exceed 500,000. Thus the affair would have been brought to a single combat, in which the enemy would have had as much to fear as ourselves. He would have hesitated, and thus I should have regained the confidence of the majority. Meanwhile, I should have surrounded myself with the National Senate or junta selected from among the members of the legislative body, men distinguished by national names and worthy of general confidence. I should have fortified my military dictatorship with all the strength of civil opinion. I should have had my tribune, which would have promulgated the talisman of my principles through Europe. The sovereigns would have trembled to behold the contagion spread among their subjects. They must have treated with me or have surrendered. But sire, we exclaimed, why did you not attempt what would infallibly have succeeded? Why are we here? Now, resumed the emperor, you are blaming and condemning me. But if you took a view of the contrary chances, you would change your tone. Besides, you forget that we reason in the hypothesis that the legislative body would have joined me. But you know what line of conduct it pursued. I might have dissolved it, to be sure. Friends in Europe perhaps blame me, then posterity will doubtless blame my weakness in not breaking up the legislative body after its insurrection. It will be said that I ought not to have separated myself from the destinies of a people who had done all for me, but by dissolving the assembly, I could at most have obtained only a capitulation from the enemy. In that case, I can repeat, blood must have been shed, and I must have proved myself a tyrant. I had, however, arranged a plan on the night of the 20th, and on the 21st measures of the most rigid severity were to have been adopted, but ere the return of the day, the dictates of humanity and prudence warned me that such a course was not to be thought of, that I should miss my aim, and that everyone was merely seeking blindly to accommodate himself to circumstances. But I must not begin again. I've already said too much on a subject which always revives painful recollections. I repeat once more that history will decide. The emperor returned to his chamber, desiring me to follow him. The 4th. At 5 o'clock, I went to meet the emperor in the garden. He had taken too warm a bath, and in consequence found himself ill. We rode out in the calash. The weather was delightful for several days. It had been very warm and dry. Before dinner, the emperor dictated to the grand marshal. But Bertrand died at the admiral's. The emperor withdrew to his chamber immediately after dinner, the 5th through the 8th. During these 4 days, the emperor invariably rode out on horseback about 6 or 7 in the morning, accompanied only by me and my son. I am unable to affirm that I never saw Napoleon swayed by either passion or prejudice. That is to say, I never knew him to pronounce a judgment on men and things that was not dictated by reason. Even when he displays what perhaps may be called anger, it is merely the effect of a transitory sensation and never influences his actions. But I can truly say that during the 18 years in which I have had the opportunity of observing his character, I never knew him to act in contradiction to reason. Another fact which has come to my knowledge, and which I note down here because it recurs to my memory at this moment, is that, either from nature, calculation, or the habit of preserving dignity, he, for the most part, represses and conceals the painful sensations which he experiences, and still more, perhaps, the kind emotions of his heart. I have frequently observed him repressing feelings of sensibility, as if he thought they compromised his character. Of this I shall hereafter adduce proofs. Meanwhile, the following characteristic trait so perfectly corresponds with the object of this journal, namely that of showing the man as he really is, and seizing nature in the fact that I cannot refrain from mentioning it. For some days past, Napoleon seemed to have something deeply at heart. A domestic circumstance that had occurred had vexed and ruffled him exceedingly. During the last 3 days and our rides about the park, he several times alluded to this circumstance with considerable warmth, desiring me to keep close by his side and ordering my son to ride on before. On one of these occasions, the following observation escaped him. I know I'm fallen, but to feel this among you, these words, the gesture, the tone that accompanied them, pierced my very heart. I was ready to throw myself at his feet and embrace his knees. I know, continued he, that man is frequently unreasonable and susceptible. Thus, when I am mistrustful of myself, I ask, should I have been treated so at the Tuileries? This is my sure test. He then spoke of himself, of us, of our reciprocal relations, of our situation in the island, and the influence which our individual circumstances might enable us to exercise. His reflections on these subjects were numerous, powerful, and just. In the emotion with which this conversation inspired me, I exclaimed, Sire, permit me to take this affair upon myself. It is certainly never that I could have viewed in this light. If the matter were explained, I am sure it would excite deep sorrow and repentance. I only ask permission to say a single word. The emperor replied with dignity, No, sir, I forbid it. I have opened my heart to you. Nature has had her course. I shall forget it, and you must seem never to have known it. On our return, we breakfasted all together in the garden, and the emperor was more than usually cheerful. In the evening, he dined in his own apartment. The 9th through the 10th. On the 9th, a ship arrived from England bringing papers to the 21st of January. The emperor continued his morning rides on horseback and passed the rest of the day in examining newspapers in his own chamber. The contents of these late papers were no less interesting than those which we had already examined. The agitation in France continued to increase. The King of Prussia had issued proclamations respecting secret societies. A misunderstanding had arisen between Austria and Bavaria. In England, the persecution of the French Protestants and the violence of the party which was gaining the ascendancy agitated the public mind, and gave arms to the opposition. Europe never presented a more violent fermentation on hearing of the deluge of evils and sanguinary events which overwhelmed all the French departments. The emperor rose from his couch and, stamping his foot violently on the ground, he exclaimed, "How unfortunate was I in not proceeding to America! From the other hemisphere, I might have protected France against reaction. The dread of my reappearance would have been a check on their violence and folly. My name would have sufficed to bridle their excess and to fill them with terror." Then, continuing the same subject, he said with a degree of warmth bordering on inspiration, "The counter-revolution, even had it been suffered to proceed, must inevitably have been lost in a grand revolution. The atmosphere of modern ideas is sufficient to stifle the old feudalists, for henceforth nothing can destroy or efface the grand principles of our revolution. Those great and excellent truths can never cease to exist. So completely are they blended with our fame, our monuments, and our prodigies. We have washed away their first stains in the blood of glory, and they will henceforth be immortal. Created in the French tribune, cemented with the blood of battles, adorned with the laurels of victory, saluted with the acclamations of the people, sanctioned by the treaties and alliances of sovereigns, and having become familiar to the ears as well as in the mouths of kings, these principles can never again retrograde. Liberal ideas flourished in Great Britain, they enlighten America, and they are nationalized in France, and this may be called the tripod whence issues the light of the world. Liberal opinions will rule the universe. They will become the faith, the religion, the morality of all nations. And in spite of all that may be advanced to the contrary, this memorable era will be inseparably connected with my name. For after all, it cannot be denied that I kindled the torch and consecrated the principle, and now persecution rends me the Messiah. Friends and enemies all must acknowledge me to be the first soldier, the grand representative of the age. Thus I shall forever remain the leading star. The 11th through the 12th, the emperor took advantage of every fine morning to ride on horseback. He breakfasted in the garden, and the conversation was afterwards maintained with great freedom and interest on the events of his own private life, on public affairs, on the individuals who surrounded his person, and those who have played a conspicuous part in the other courts of Europe. The English lessons were no longer thought of. They were continued only in our riser walks during the daytime. What the emperor thus lost in grammatical accuracy, he gained in facility of expression. About 5 o'clock on the 11th, we took our usual airing in the calash. In the evening, we resumed our ministerial anecdotes and conversations on celebrated persons. Napoleon gave us a history of Monsieur Pozzo di Borgo, his countryman, who had been a member of the legislative body. It was he, it said, who advised the Emperor Alexander to march upon Paris, even though Napoleon should have attacked his rear. And thus, said the Emperor, he decided the fate of France, of European civilization, and the destinies of the whole world. He had acquired great influence in the Russian cabinet. On the 20th of March, continued the emperor, blank, blank, blank. He also gave us the history of Monsieur Capodistria. He then spoke of Monsieur Metternich. It was he, said Napoleon, who, blank, blank, blank. The emperor next spoke of his own ministers of Bassano, whom he believed to have been sincerely attached to him. Clark, to whose character time he said would do ample justice. See whom late events had shown to have been worth but little. The emperor has successfully appointed him ambassador to Vienna, minister of the interior, and minister for foreign affairs. Talleyrand observed, the emperor described his character in a word when he said of him with his usual point and ill-natured spirit that he was a man who could make himself fit for any place on the eve of his appointment to it. The conversation next turned on Monsieur Cabaceres, whom Napoleon called a man of abuses, observing that he had a decided inclination for the old regime. Lebrun, on the contrary, had a predilection to the opposite extreme. He said the emperor was the man of idealisms. These two men, he observed, were the counterpoises between which the first consul had placed himself, who in his turn was humorously called the consolidated third. Messieurs de T and Fouché were next spoken of. After saying a great deal respecting both, the emperor proceeded to make some energetic remarks on the morality of individuals connected with the ministry in France, and generally of all functionaries or men in office, on their want of political faith or national feeling, which led them indifferently to adopt one line of conduct today and another line of conduct tomorrow. This levity, this inconsistency, said he, has descended to us from antiquity. We still remain Gauls, and our character will never be complete until we learn to substitute principles for turbulence, pride for vanity, and above all, the love of institutions for the love of places. The emperor concluded that at the close of our late events, the monarchs of Europe must necessarily have attained a retrospective feeling of scorn and contempt for the great people who had thus sported with sovereignty. But, said he, the excuse may perhaps be found in the nature of things and in the power of circumstances. Democracy raises up sovereignty. Aristocracy preserves it. Mine had neither taken a deep enough root nor acquired sufficient spirit. At the moment of the crisis, it was still connected with democracy, and it mingled with the multitude instead of becoming the sheet anchor to shield the people from the fury of the tempest and to guide them in their blindness. The following are some fresh particulars respecting Monsieur de T and Monsieur Fouché, whose names have so frequently been mentioned. I endeavor as much as possible to avoid repetitions. Monsieur de T said the emperor waited 2 days and nights at Vienna for full powers to treat for peace in my name, but I should have been ashamed to have thus prostituted my policy, and yet perhaps my conduct in this instance has purchased my exile to St. Helena, for I cannot but allow that T is a man of singular talent and capable at all times of throwing great weight into the scale. T, continued he, was always in a state of treason, but it was in participation with fortune. His circumspection was extreme. He treated his friends as if they might in future become his enemies, and he behaved to his enemies as if they might sometime or other become his friends. Monsieur de T had always been, in my opinion, hostile to the Faubourg Saint-Germain in the affair of the divorce. He was for the Empress Josephine. It was he who urged the war with Spain. Though in public he had the art to appear averse to it. Thus it was from a kind of spite that Napoleon made choice of Valenciennes at the residence of Ferdinand. In short, said the Emperor, T was the principal instrument and the active cause of the death of the Duc d'Enghien. Napoleon observed that a celebrated actress, Mademoiselle Raucourt, had described him with great truth. If you ask him a question, said she, he is an iron chest, whence you cannot extract a syllable. But if you ask him nothing, you will soon be unable to stop his mouth. He will become a regular gossip. This was a foible which at the outset destroyed the confidence of the emperor and made him waver in his opinion of T. I had entrusted him, said Napoleon, with a very important affair, and a few hours after, Josephine related it to me word for word. I instantly sent for the minister to inform him that I just learned from the Empress a circumstance which I had told in confidence to him alone. The story had already passed through 4 or 5 intermediate channels. T's countenance at the emperor so movable that nothing can ever be read in it. Vladimir used jokingly to say of him that if while he was speaking to you, someone should come behind him and give him a kick, his countenance would betray no indication of the affront. Monsieur de Talleyrand is mild and even endearing in his domestic habits. His servants and the individuals in his employment are attached and devoted to him. Among his intimate friends, he willingly and good-humoredly speaks of his ecclesiastic profession. He one day expressed his dislike of a tune which was played in his hearing. He said he had a great horror of it. It was recalled to his recollection the time when he was obliged to practice church music and to sing at the desk. On another occasion, one of his intimate friends was telling a story during supper while Monsieur de Talleyrand was engaged in thought and seemed inattentive to the conversation. In the course of the story, the speaker happened to say in a lively manner of someone whom he had named, "That fellow's a comical rogue. He's a married priest." Talleyrand, roused by these words, seized a spoon, plunged it hastily into the dish before him, and with a threatening aspect called down to him, "Mr. Such-a-one, will you have some spinach?" The person who was telling the story was confounded, and all the party burst into a fit of laughter, Monsieur de Talleyrand as well as the left. The emperor at the time of the Concordat wished to have made Mr. de Talleyrand a cardinal and to have placed him at the head of ecclesiastical affairs. He told him that his proper destiny was to return to the bosom of the church, to refresh his memory, and to stop the mouths of declaimers. Talleyrand, however, would never agree to this. His aversion to the ecclesiastical profession was insurmountable. Napoleon was very near appointing him ambassador to Warsaw, dignity which he subsequently conferred on the Abbé de Prat. But his shabby stock jobbing tricks, as the emperor called them, occasioned this intention to be abandoned. The emperor was induced by the same reasons, and at the instance of several sovereigns of Germany, to deprive him of the portfolio of foreign affairs. The emperor marked that Fouché was the Talleyrand of the clubs, and that Talleyrand was the Fouché of the drawing rooms. Intrigue, he said, was to Fouché a necessary of life. He intrigued at all times, in all places, in all ways, and with all persons. Nothing ever came to light, but he was found to have had a hand in it. He made it his sole business to look out for something that he might be meddling with. His mania was to wish to be concerned in everything, always in everybody's shoes. This the emperor would often repeat. At the time of the conspiracy of George, when Moreau was arrested, Fouché was no longer at the head of the police, and he endeavored to make himself very much regretted. What stupidity, said he, they've arrested Moreau when he returned to Paris from his country residence, a circumstance which at least appeared like the confidence of innocence. On the contrary, he should have been seized when he went to Grosbois, for then he evidently fled. The remark which he made, or which is attributed to him in the affair of the Duc d'Aiguillon, is well known. It is more than a crime, it is a fault, said he. Such traits as these paint the character of a man better than whole volumes. The emperor knew Fouché well and never became his dupe. He has been much blamed for having employed him in 1815, when indeed Fouché basely betrayed him. Napoleon was not ignorant of his disposition, but he also knew that the danger depended more on the circumstance than on the individual. If I had been victorious, said he, Fouché would have been faithful. He took great care, it is true, to hold himself in readiness for whatever might happen. I ought to have conquered. The emperor, however, was acquainted with his underhand dealings, and he did not spare him. After Napoleon's return in 1815, one of the first bankers of Paris presented himself at the Élysée to inform him that a few days previously a person just arrived from Vienna had waited upon him with letters of credit and had made inquiries respecting the means by which he could meet with Fouché. Whether from reflection or presentiment, the banker conceived some doubts respecting this individual and accordingly came to communicate them in person to the emperor, who was astonished that Fouché had concealed the matter from his knowledge. In the course of a few hours, Riel found the person in question, immediately brought him to the Élysée, where he was shut up in a small room by himself. The emperor ordered him to be brought into the garden. "Do you know me?" said he to the man. This commencement and the feelings which the emperor's presence inspired greatly startled the stranger. "I am acquainted with all your proceedings," continued Napoleon in a tone of severity. "If you this moment confess all you know, I may pardon you. If not, you will be taken from this garden to be shot." "I will tell all," said the man. "I am sent hither by Monsieur de Metternich to the Duke of Otranto to propose that he will dispatch a messenger to Bâle, who will there meet the messenger sent by Monsieur de Metternich from Vienna. These," continued he, delivering some papers, "are the marks of recognition which they are to possess." "Have you executed your mission to Fouché?" inquired the emperor. "Yes." "Has he dispatched his messenger?" "I do not know." The man was put under confinement, and within an hour a confidential person was on the road to Bâle. He introduced himself to the Austrian messenger, and even held 4 conferences with him.